Do you understand the words that are coming out of my mouth?
Quiet, numbskulls, I'm broadcasting.
Can we get serious now?
One thing that did happen during the 60s was some music of an unusual or experimental nature did get recorded and did get released. Now look at who the executives were in those companies at those times. Not hip young guys. These were cigar-chomping old guys who looked at the product that came and said, I don't know. Who knows what it is? Record it, stick it out. If it sells, all right. We were better off with those guys than we are now with the supposedly hip young executives who are making the decisions of what people should see and hear in the marketplace.
Success in the music business begins with a dream, a vision. This podcast will give you, the listener, the insight and tools to turn that vision into a reality. Meet the industry professionals who work day by day behind the scenes, helping to make those dreams come true. Welcome to the business side of music.
The guest we have with us today is an articulate and charismatic businessman, entrepreneur, and influencer. I have followed this guy's career for, I'm going to say, decades. This guy's got a track record of being at the forefront of innovation in the music and entertainment industry. His constant focus on evolution and revolution is dominant throughout his varied and successful career, which, by the way, spans 5 decades and is littered with household names. From being at the center of the British progressive rock and punk scenes in the late 60s and 70s to launching record labels and managing hugely successful bands and musicians. You might recognize some of the names: The Police, Sting, Squeeze, R.E.M, and the Bangles. This man has spent over 30 years working with artists who dominated the charts in the U.S., the U.K., and across the world. Miles Copeland, welcome to the show.
Well, nice to be here. I should hire you as my publicist. That sounded really good. Made me sound really important.
I've been told that once or twice. Not only with everything else that you have accomplished, and I do want to talk about your career and how you got started, because I think in your childhood and your adolescence, that alone is probably worth an entire discussion. You're also now the author of a book called 2 Steps Forward, 1 Step Back, My Life in the Music Business.
Yeah, well, the title was almost an offshoot of what I originally was intending. I was intending the book to be more of a motivational, inspirational book about marketing and sort of making it in the music business and all that. Lessons I learned from successes and mistakes I made along the way, Right. And the idea being that, you can always go forward, but you're going to make mistakes. So therefore, there's the 1 step back element of it, So don't get depressed if you make a mistake now and then, because everybody's going to do it. That's sort of the idea, But as you were saying, it's true. I grew up in places like Egypt, Lebanon, and Syria, which were, let's say, not really the centers of Western music. And I knew nothing about the music business before I got into it. Literally nothing.
So let's go back. You spent your childhood and your adolescence. You moved around quite a bit, as you said, between the U.S. and Syria and Egypt and Lebanon. Your mother worked for British intelligence, and your father was U.S. Army counterintelligence. And from what I understand, a founding member of the CIA?
Yeah, well, he was in OSS, which was intelligence during World War II. And at the end of the war, they decided they would centralize a lot of the U.S. intelligence agencies from the Army, Navy, Air Force, and whatever. Hence, it's called the Central Intelligence Agency. So he's noted as one of the founders of the CIA. My mother was actually in British intelligence called SOE and was involved in sending paratroopers into France during World War II to blow up trains and stuff. So that was sort of my background, and interestingly enough, when I lived in Egypt, I met Gamal Abdel Nasser, president of Egypt, and his bodyguard, who later became a prime minister of Egypt, met Kim Philby, who ended up as one of the greatest Russian spies ever, so I sort of grew up in that world, which really had nothing to do with music.
I was going to say, to come really from the spy world into the music industry, you didn't have to make the transition, obviously, but how did you get started in the music business?
Well, I graduated from the American University in Beirut, and after I got rejected by the U.S. Army, I went back to London. I was approached by a group, and they said, well, you helped us out in Beirut, and we think you'd make a great manager. And I just thought, well, what the hell, I didn't really know anything, but I knew what I liked. And that was basically it, So I knew what music I liked. I kind of started and I learned more by mistakes, really, than successes, and especially in the beginning. But it was really almost a fluke, It was just one of those things. And I had nothing else to do. My father had talked me out of going into the CIA. He thought it would be depressing and I would not really want to put up with all the stupid ideas. And so I thought, well, music sounded good. And I ended up in music, which he also thought was a little crazy because he thought that I should get a real job first, But then I got my first record deal, and from that point on, he said, okay, son, you're on your own and you're doing it. So go ahead, so that was great.
Did you have any formal education at all getting into the business, or was it just kind of, and you've said it, and I agree, we all make mistakes in this business. Some are bigger than others, but you obviously have to learn, or you should be learning from your mistakes. But did you have any type of formal education, book experience going in, or was this all kind of by the seat of your pants and I'm just going to figure this out as I go?
It was really by the seat of my pants because I really didn't know anything. My education was politics, history, thinking I would be doing business in the Middle East and working on the stock market or whatever. I literally knew nothing about music other than I liked music and I knew what I liked. That was really my grounding. And it was a matter of learning as I went, making mistakes and whatever, and learning from those mistakes. But my vision was really very simple. If I think it's great and I'll buy the record, then I'm not so crazy as other people might not buy it too. So, that was sort of my lesson. If I like it, well, it must be good. That was sort of my thought.
I think I read somewhere that you had actually helped put such groups like Wishbone Ash together. Was that just a part of, hey, I think I like this. I think this can work. Let's see what happens?
What actually happened was I was going around looking at clubs, trying to learn what was going on. And I came across this group called Tanglewood, and they sounded really great. And at the end of the show, I went up to the drummer and I said, well, I really liked what you were doing. And then he gave me his tale of woe, that was the last show they were doing. And they were breaking up and it was all a disaster. And I said, well, maybe I can help, Well, I think he probably figured, well, this is some American, maybe he can help. They showed up at my parents' house to meet me a few days later. And that became what eventually became Wishbone Ash, so the drummer and the bass player stayed, the guitar player quit and left. So we auditioned some more guitar players, couldn't make up our mind to have one player. So we ended up with two.
Right.
It was Andy Powell and Ted Turner. So again, it was like there was no plan originally to have it we thought it was going to be a three-piece group, but we couldn't make up our mind. So we ended up with two guitar players and then decided, well, let's do duet guitars, sounded like a good idea, a little bit different. I was literally out scouting to try to learn the business, came across this group. Next thing I know, I'm their manager.
Did you help them put their first record deal together?
Well, what actually happened is I was here in London. I was an American in London. And I was thinking, well, the group's rehearsing and they're going to be asking me pretty soon to, what about our gigs? How are we going to get shows, So I bought music papers and looked at the back pages, and I saw this ad for the Booker's Bible with the names of everybody in the whole country in England who would book a band. So I thought, well, that sounds like a good idea. And I call up the phone number, and I get this sort of crooked sounding guy. But he said, look, buy the book, and I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll come and help you, show you how it works. And you just pay me a commission on any gig I book. And I thought, well, I knew nothing. So I thought, well, how bad could that be? And then he wanted me to pick him up at his house. So I figured, well, if he's a crook, he's pretty stupid because I'm going to know where he lives. I bring him over. He starts booking shows, and I paid him a little bit of money for the shows that he booked. And well, to cut a long story short, all the bookings were phony.
Oh, no.
When I realized this, I phoned up all the bookings, and they all said things like, no, we do disco here. We don't have live groups, or the address was, everyone was a phony. And I felt so stupid that I decided, you know what, before I let the group know that all the gigs they thought they were going to have coming up were phony, that I would get on the phone and actually try and see if this booking book worked. And actually, there were a lot of the phone numbers that did work. And I think with an American accent, I sounded probably different than most of the people calling up these places. So lo and behold, I actually made some bookings. So when Wishbone Ash finally came over and said, okay, and I said, well, guys, I've got some good news and bad news. The bad news is all the gigs you thought you had, none of them are happening. And then they went and oh, I told you so. I told you the guy was a crook. I said, yeah, well, actually, I've actually booked some shows that are definitely happening. And so at least I was not a complete fool. Anyway, one of those shows happened to be playing with Deep Purple. And Richie Blackmore saw Wishbone Ash, quite liked them, called up his producer, who was a guy named Derek Lawrence, and said, you should check this group out. So Derek Lawrence calls me up, comes and meets the group, and says, I can get you a record deal. And he was the one that helped me get the deal with MCA Records. So it was literally a couple of steps away. I didn't know who MCA was, but the producer talked me into going there, and we made the deal, and that was the start of it.
And back in those days, record deals were definitely a lot different than they are today. Was that something as you navigated those waters with the record label? Obviously, it was uncharted territory. Was it anything that you even thought it could be or anticipated or expected? Or was it like, holy crap, what is this we're getting into?
Well, the thing is, once you have a record deal with a company that's known, you're sort of like, it's a validation that you're in the game. So I saw that more of as a positive move that we got an advance. Of course, back in those days, it was like a $20,000 advance, which was actually like quite a lot of money. Having a record label behind us meant we were actually in the game, and actually they funded going to America. So Wishbone Ash toured America, paid for by MCA Records. So that kind of meant that we were actually participating in the business, playing clubs and whatever. The record company helped me get an agent in America. And so I sort of began to learn the whole process of taking a band to America from England. Again, it was a step-by-step process. If I did that record deal today, I certainly would have made different changes in it. But at the time, it looked pretty good to me, and it actually worked.
In the studio with us today, Miles Copeland, music entrepreneur, legend of the music industry. Let's just say it, a legend in the entertainment industry, and the author of the book, 2 Steps Forward and 1 Step Back, My Life in the Music Business.
Salut, c'est Ariane Paras et vous écoutez le Business Side of Music.
You're listening to the Business Side of Music.
Hi everyone, I'm Larry Butler, and I want to send you a free digital copy of my new book, The Singer-Songwriter Rulebook, 101 Ways to Help You Improve Your Chances of Success. That's right, everything you need to know to launch your career as a singer-songwriter, all based on my 40 years in the live performance arena, and believe me, I've seen it all. In my book, you'll find the 10 things you have to deal with before even thinking about becoming a singer-songwriter performer. You'll also learn about the 5 things every singer-songwriter can do this weekend to make their live show better. 5 things I can guarantee that you are not doing already. Plus, there's tips on songwriting and staging, photo and video shoots, publishing, merch, dozens of other topics. All written for people who don't particularly like to read. And again, it's free. Just go to the Business Side of Music website homepage and look for my book cover. Click on it, and a free digital copy of my book will be yours. I'm Larry Butler, and I approve of this message.
You're listening to the Business Side of Music.
Miles Copeland is joining us today. I'm enjoying this conversation because the business, since the time you and I both got into it, the dynamics have changed so much. One of the things I absolutely have to ask you is, how did the police come together? And at what point did you know you had something here that maybe very few people had seen before?
Well, what actually happened was, in my process of trying to break groups, my first groups that I was representing didn't really have great singles, and they had been around a while and all that. I didn't really start by having #1 records and big hit singles and all of that. It was really by playing live shows and building sort of from the ground up. And then I did this tour of Europe thinking that that would help me break my bands much bigger in that marketplace. Well, the tour ended up being a disaster because one of the players, Lou Reed, had changed contracts unbeknownst to me, and his agency didn't tell me. And Lou never showed up for the tour.
Oh my gosh!
And apparently he'd locked himself in a bathroom someplace in New Zealand or something. And when I finally got his assistant on the phone, I was told, well, Lou's in the bathroom. And I said, well, I'll wait. The answer was, well, you'll have a long wait because he's been in there 3 days already, and I don't know when he's coming out. So that pretty much told me that I was in deep trouble. Anyway, that tour ended up as a disaster. So now I'm in London. I'm completely broke. I've moved back in with my parents. And lo and behold, at the same time, the punk rock thing was happening in England, and nobody in the music business paid any attention to them. They couldn't get any record deals. Nobody would pay attention. Everybody thought the music was crap. And the fact that I didn't have any money and that nobody cared about me anymore in the traditional business was not a hindrance dealing with the punks, because they were interested in anybody that knew anything about the music business. So I found myself gravitating towards the punks, and I worked with the Sex Pistols and Generation X with Billy Idol and all these sort of new bands. And I got very interested in this whole new generation of music. And I talked my brother Stewart into getting interested in as well. And then he had met Sting somewhere on his tour with Curved Air and invited Sting to London, who had nothing to do. They decided to form this punk group called The Police. So Stewart really started the group. And I, as the brother, of course, was starting to book shows and try to find ways to book this group. But of course, they really weren't punks because Sting was a jazz player. Stewart had been in Curved Air, which was sort of a progressive rock band, but they had the look and they had the attitude. And that was really the start of The Police. Nobody really knew anything about the band or cared about the band. Finally, when things were really looking like they were falling apart, I said, well, look, let's go in the studio and let's record an album. And Stewart just thinking, well, anything's better than nothing. Let's do it, And I had found a studio that for a few $1,000s would give us a month in the studio. And I figured, well, how bad could that be? So we went in and recorded the album. And then I go in and listen every now and then, and I was not particularly impressed. And on the last session, the band played me the whole album. And I was like, well, I was thinking they wanted to be a punk group, and it really wasn't that punky. Finally, I said, well, are there any more songs? And they said, yeah, well, there's one more, but don't play it because it's a ballad. You're going to hate it. And I said, well, no, I'm here. I've paid to get here. So play it. Finally, the engineer puts it on. Well, what is the song? Roxanne.
Oh, wow.
So I'm listening to this song. The band are sitting there looking like death, thinking that I'm going to really hate this song. At the end of the song, I looked at them all and said, gentlemen, you've created a classic. This is bigger than me. I'm going to take it and get you a real record deal at A&M Records tomorrow. And they all looked at me and said, what? You like that? And they lit up, and it was like, well, of course, we discovered later that Sting had other songs, Can't Stand Losing You and others that were sort of in the same vein. Anyway, I did go to A&M Records and get them a record deal, and that sort of was the start of The Police. But it was a song which even the band thought was nothing.
From that point of you going and getting a record deal, did it take for them to break into the mainstream and really put people on their heels and take notice?
Well, I couldn't get anybody interested in England. So I figured, well, my brother Ian is now a booking agent in America. And, Laker Airways was giving air flights to New York for 75 pounds or something. So I figured, well, I could probably afford to take the band to America, where there'll be a brand new group that, they won't have all the baggage of that they have in England, So we went to America and we played CBGBs and the Rat Club and every dump you can think of on the East Coast, And one of the shows, and I use this in the book to illustrate that you can never be too careful or too precious about where you're playing, because you never know who's going to be in the audience. And I get asked times to say, well, what was the most important gig of your life? And I said, well, it was probably in Northern New York, playing to 4 people. And they were imagining I would say things like Shea Stadium, to 88,000 people, sold out in minutes, And I say, no, the most important gig was to 4 people. One of those 4 people was a guy named Oedipus, who was a DJ at a college station in Boston, who was so enamored with the Police when they gave him the Roxanne single that he went back to his radio station and just banged that single, so that other stations picked it up, and it all of a sudden became like an airplay hit on the East Coast. And it was noticed by the people at the A&M record company in America, who called me up and said, well, is this our record? And I said, yeah, it is. And they said, well, we better do something. And I said, yeah, you better. They said, well, get the Police back to America. So I call up my brother Ian again, and I say, okay, looks like we got some action here. They're going to put the record out in America. So let's get the band back to America. So Ian now books the Police all across America, playing the Whiskey A Go-Go and all these places. And that was the start of the Police.
What a great story. I had heard that at one point they couldn't get a break in England and they had to come over to the States. So I'm glad to hear that's how it came together. And then, of course, from that point on, you mentioned Shea Stadium, that they set a record there, too.
That first tour of America, when I showed up at the record company, I was literally thrown out of the office. They said, take your group and go home. You have no business being here. Because we were the first British group ever to tour America, which was not supported by a record company. We didn't even have a release in America. The Roxanne single that we gave to Oedipus was brought from England, is in one of the group's knapsacks, Anyway, America did reasonably well, on that first album. But back in England, the first album really didn't do anything. But the second album went straight to number one. And I'd had this idea that we would still try to keep our punk credibility by doing a show at this stand-up venue called Hammersmith Palais. And across the street, we would play at the Hammersmith Odeon, which was a sort of prestigious venue that, big groups played, And we would do the same show each night. We would do Hammersmith Odeon, then go across the street and do Hammersmith Palais right afterwards. And I decided, well, to make an event of it, I would rent a half-track tank, basically, to go across the street. Lucky I did, because when we went out of the venue, there were thousands of people in the intersection blocking traffic. It was complete bedlam. And at that moment, I realized when everybody was saying this is the biggest band there is, I was thinking, well, you know what? They might just be right. And it was complete craziness, and the album went straight to number one. The single went straight to number one. The next single went straight to number one. But of course, in America, it didn't do as well. It took a couple more records to break America. But around the world, the Police became this monstrous act. The music worked and they became very influential. And the reality was, from my perspective, is that a lot of the stuff we did were really, again, flying by the seat of our pants. Nobody knew what we had. Everybody had rejected us. So we made a lot of decisions that were based on trying to do something different, mainly because we didn't have a lot of options. I couldn't get a regular record deal with a big advance. So I said, well, to A&M, you can have it for free. Just pay me a big royalty. So I figured that's one of the lessons of the book. It's if you make the answer yes, an easy yes, you're likely to get yes as an answer. If you make the answer no easy, you're likely to get no. And that was one of the real lessons that I learned along the way. Again, starting I.R.S. Records the same way. I went to Jerry Moss and said, look, I can't let you listen to the music because you're going to hate it. But I'm not going to, at the same token, I'm not going to ask for your money. Just release the records. Let your salespeople tell you what they think they can sell, and let's go for it. And he said, well, that was an easy yes. So he said yes.
We're going to take another break, get another word in for another one of our sponsors. When we come back, we're going to have some more conversation with Miles Copeland.
Hey, this is R.E.M. and you're listening to the business side of music.
You're listening to the business side of music.
Whether you consider yourself a musician or not, music is all around us, and it affects our everyday lives, whether it's background music influencing our shopping habits in a store, organ music adding the vibe to a baseball game, or a playlist convincing us to keep going on that last mile of a run. I'm Mindy Peterson, host of the podcast Enhance Life with Music, where we take a holistic look at music's benefits through the lens of science and medicine, entertainment, and business. You can find me and Enhance Life with Music at mpetersonmusic.com/podcast or wherever you get your audio.
You're listening to the business side of music.
Back in the studio, music industry legend Miles Copeland is with us, along with everything else he's accomplished, the book that is coming out. What date is this book coming out, by the way?
Well, it's actually interesting. In England, it's coming out June 18, and in America, July 13. And it's already pre-selling on Amazon. And the reason of the gap between the two is because the book was going to be printed in China, but the Chinese censored objected to me making a comment about Taiwan and about Chairman Mao. So they canceled the book printing and it had to be moved to the Czech Republic. So, of course, we had to print the book there and they were then mailed to America, which obviously takes a bit of time. So that's why there's a gap. I guess I could say I was censored by the Chinese, which I guess is a kudo.
I'm going to say it's never easy, is it?
Yeah, well, I kind of look upon it as a vote of confidence in that I got rejected by the Chinese censors.
Absolutely. Anyways, we were going to say author of 2 Steps Forward, 1 Step Back, that you can go online and order now, pre-order now. I'm going to assume. You founded I.R.S. Records through a deal with A&M, and you signed such acts as R.E.M. and the Cramps and the Bangles, and then you went ahead and had a #1 album with the Go-Go's. How did it come about you discovering these different acts?
Well, the reality is that the new wave, as it became known, was as revolutionary to the American record business as the sort of punk rocks was to the English. And everybody sort of wrote off these bands. The Go-Go's could not get a record deal. And they assumed, and they've said so publicly, that the reason they couldn't get a record deal is because they were all women. They're all girls who played their own instruments and wrote their own songs and performed them and all that. And there had never been an all-girl group having been a big success in the American record business. So when I went to sign the Go-Go's, I was looking up there thinking, wow, they're a great group. I love the songs. They got a lot of energy. How bad could that be? What a great hook. All girls, that sounded like a great marketing tool for me. Yet I look around, there's not a single other person from a record company there wanting to sign the group. So I ended up signing a lot of bands with no competition whatsoever, because nobody would pay attention to these sort of groups. So I signed the Go-Go's, the Buzzcocks, the Cramps, Wall of Voodoo, Oingo Boing, all sorts of other groups who were considered the misfits and, homeless people who couldn't get record deals in America. Almost the same as it was in England when I was signing groups to, like the Police, basically. So, of course, when the Go-Go's happened, it became a #1 record, then other labels began to wake up and I began to find competition. And, so part of the story of I.R.S. Records, again, gone through in the book, is that you can start off and be kind of revolutionary, but a lot of times you end up basically becoming what you were objected to in the beginning, and that's sort of the story of I.R.S. Records, is we became kind of corporate and we were signing records that mainly that we needed to sell records to pay for staff and to pay for rent, all that. Whereas in the beginning, we signed what we liked only. And that was the only criteria. If we liked it, we signed. Whether it sold or not was really not that relevant, but it became relevant. And that really is the sort of tragedy of a lot of businesses. That, you start off with something great and you end up getting stuck because you're successful.
And sometimes doing what you like to do and doing what you need to do almost contradict each other, don't you think?
Well, that sort of became the story. And I made a point in the book of saying that, you can start off as a revolutionary, but there are various steps that can really end that sort of motivation, because as you grow, people expect more of you. Remember, when we first started off with I.R.S. Records, everybody sort of dismissed us as sort of this cute, fun thing. When we had a #1 record in America, we weren't so cute anymore. All of a sudden, we were real business. You could make money out of this thing. When the Police were #1, people began to realize they could sell out Shea Stadium in a few minutes. There's real money here. So that sort of changed a lot of people's attitudes. And, the business basically changed, and my position in it changed. And I think probably the first time that I realized that I, as a manager, was looked upon in a different way was I was invited to be the keynote speaker at a music convention. There were about 2,000 people in the room. And so I got up and made my speech about, music and all that. I can't even remember what I said, but I'm assuming it was something intelligent. At least I hope so. So I walk off the stage and I'm getting ready to leave the venue. And this girl comes running up to me with a tape in her hand. And she looks at me and hands me the tape. And just as she does so, she faints in front of me.
Oh, my gosh.
And I'm thinking, my first response was to say, I didn't hit her. I did nothing, assuming that people would have thought I had done. And what I realized was that she was looking at me as somebody that could change her life, that she would give me this music. And if I said yes, somehow I would mystically make her a big star, and she was so overcome with this idea that she literally fainted in front of me.
Oh, my gosh.
And at that moment, I realized, I'm not just some rock and roll manager or a founder of a record company. I'm looked upon as some sort of mystic god who can change people's lives. And I'm thinking to myself, well, I'm just this little old guy signing records that he likes. But no, that was not how I was looked upon by others.
You're working on a project these days. You have a new company. You are the owner and operator of the CIA, but this is an entirely different CIA. This is Copeland International Arts. this is a little different company from the norm from what I read. It's a multifaceted company, and you're doing quite a few different things, and it's more, correct me if I'm wrong, but it's more world music involved.
Well, again, I was always looking for things where I was not beating my head against the wall of all the big companies, and of course, a lot of world music or rock en español or music in different languages is usually forgotten about by American record companies and British record companies. So I tended to gravitate towards a lot of this interesting music. And around the world, there is some great music. As these days, it's probably a little easier to get some of that music exposed through Spotify's and whatever. But normally, it's really, if it's not in English, you're just not going to get any attention paid to you, So I tended to look. Although it did lead to an interesting phone call I got from the Pentagon one day after we had invaded Iraq. They had heard that I was interested in Arab music, and that they had been told by the Recording Institute of America that I was the only American who understood this world, and that maybe I could help win hearts and minds in the Middle East. So I get a phone call from Donald Rumsfeld's office saying, "We want to invite you to the Pentagon to advise us how we can make the Arabs love us." Well, you can imagine I was on the next plane to Washington, D.C. to go to the Pentagon to report for duty.
Yeah.
Anyway, I now look for interesting projects that are a little off the wall and not necessarily, in the mainstream of the music business, so that I'm not going to find myself competing against the, Universals and Warner Brothers of this world. I try to find niches that are interesting or that excite me musically. I'm working with Steve Vai on a guitar project called Generation X. Again, it's the sort of idea that musicianship still has a value. Where a lot in the music business now, it's the producer and the songwriter and that are the important thing, and the singer. Whereas the musician who plays the music isn't necessarily recognized, which is why I became involved in Keith Urban, who's a Nashville writer, and player and a brilliant guitar player, and invited him to a songwriter retreat in France, where he met the two girls from the Go-Go's, who he wrote the first hit single with, which changed his life. So again, who would have ever thought that an Australian guitar player living in Nashville would meet two girls from Los Angeles in a punk group called the Go-Go's, and they would write a song that would go to number one in the American country charts, and he would later marry Nicole Kidman, etc. So
yeah,
it's the strangest combinations that sometimes work.
With you going out and finding acts from all over the world, and I guess maybe it's not just music, you're also looking into dance and other aspects of the world music market. Do you think it's because here in the United States, and I can't speak for the United Kingdom, but here in the United States, we put our horse blinders on and we really can't see outside of really what's on radio or what's on Spotify. But don't you find, and I use the term world music maybe a little too loosely here, but there are other genres of music and entertainment out there that is so global that we really haven't even touched upon here, have we?
Well, I think, one of the great examples would be, river dance. I mean, you don't normally think of Irish dance music as hit music, but yet you put dancers next to them and you put them on a show and they tour the world and become a huge success. And I think that Riverdance did a lot for Irish music, for traditional Irish music, which would have probably never been as big had it not been for Riverdance. Well, I tried to do the same thing with the Belly Dance Superstars, taking Arabic music and creating a sort of dance show using the art of belly dance as a central theme. And we took that music and had it play around the world. We did 800 shows in 25 countries, playing Arabic music. So I think that group helped expose a lot of Arabic music to people who would have never heard it before. And I think that's one of the methods. My view was always, again, I go through this in the book, is, by hook or crook, find some way to reach people, because people always say the music business has changed. But in reality, there's one thing that has never changed. I don't care whether you're selling wiffle midgets or a can of beans. The first object is to get attention. And, I had bands say to me in the past, well, it's about the music, man. And I go, well, no, it's not. That's number two. The first thing is how to get people to know you exist. That's lesson one. Lesson two is now that they know you exist, then they hear the music and hopefully it's good and they want to buy it. But if they don't know you exist, I don't care how good your music is or your can of beans or your wiffle midget. nobody's going to buy it. So the first job is always, how do you get attention? Well, it's changed now how you get attention. Maybe you use Spotify, or you use a commercial, or you use other methods, but the object is still the same. How to get attention, how to let the public know you exist. And, I would use the example of Desert Rose with Sting. It was a duet with an Arab singer called Sheb Mami. And it starts in Arabic, in a kind of strange dialect of Arabic, which I couldn't understand. And I was told by the American record company, it's not a single because we don't like music that has different languages in it. So they refused to put it out. Well, the Europeans did put it out, and they were less precious about it not being all in English. But we had to have a video for Europe. So we filmed a video with a Jaguar car in it. And I'm looking at the video thinking to myself, my God, we made a car commercial. So I called up Jaguar Cars and I said, look, we've got this car commercial using Sting's music from his new album. And by the way, I've sold your car in this video because your car looks great. My problem is I'll give you the commercial for free as long as you can make a commercial out of it that looks like it's an ad for Sting's album. And they thought I was crazy. But a couple of days later, I get a phone call back from Jaguar saying, we've just seen what you've sent us, and we would love to do something. Well, the next thing I know, Jaguar creates a commercial, puts it on the Super Bowl, and spends $18 million on TV ads. And it was the biggest success ever of a commercial tie-in between a music act and a product. And next thing I know, the public is listening to the commercial and then calling up their local radio station and saying, why aren't you playing the new Sting single? And the radio station is going, well, what Sting single? And the kids, whoever calling up was saying, well, the one about the desert and the rose and the thing, Sting thing. They would call the record company and say, well, you screwed us. You're not giving us the Sting single. The record company would go, what Sting single? And they would say, the desert and the road. So the record company, of course, realizes what it is, rushes out the single. It goes top 15, and becomes a huge success for Sting. And the album takes off again, goes from just under 1 million copies sold to 9 million. It was like a huge success. Well, of course, the other thing that happened was that it saved Jaguar Cars because, unbeknownst to me, Jaguar was looked upon as an old man's car, and they figured that within 10 years, no one's going to be alive to buy the car. So they needed to lower the age group to 45 or something, which that song did, and saved Jaguar. So I can look out right now and see a Jaguar car drive by and think, well, I helped save that brand. But it was literally the public knew what was good, but the powers that be did not. They rejected it. But the public listened to the song, liked it, called their radio station, who called the record company puts it out. So the public was really the one that made Desert Rose happen.
In all of the things that you have done over your 5 decades in the business, is there anything you haven't done yet that you wish you had or are still hoping to get accomplished?
I think that it's a mistake if you kind of look upon it that way because, there's always going to be something. There were always acts that I thought should have been big that didn't happen for one reason or another. Was it my fault? Was it the act's fault? Was it the manager's fault? Was it timing? Who knows? But if you spend your time worried about where you failed, I think you're going to not relish your successes. And I think that is an important thing. So yes, would there be things that I wish I'd done better? Would there have been acts that I wish would have succeeded? Some of my favorite acts shot themselves in the foot. One of my favorite was Timbuk 3, who had a song called Future So Bright I Gotta Wear Shades. And Pat McDonald, who wrote the song, just refused to let it go for a commercial. And we turned down millions of dollars for that song. Reebok and, Ray-Ban sunglasses wanted to have Future So Bright I Gotta Wear Shades. What a perfect tie-in. And this was a guy that if he had done it, the record would have been huge, just like Desert Rose was. But no, he decided that giving a song to a commercial was a mistake. So he wouldn't do it. He stuck to his guns,
Right.
Do I think he's crazy? Yeah. Do I love him still? Yeah. Because he was a great artist, But there were others like that, who often, for their own reason, decided they wouldn't play the game, whatever, So in answer to your question, well, I don't belabor the ones that I failed with, but I'm not afraid to say that I failed, which was why I called the book 2 Steps Forward, 1 Step Back, because I took a lot of steps back.
And yet you survived.
Well, that's part of the point of it, isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
I mean, like I say, I really wrote the book more as a motivational thing. So I think it would relate to even if you're a hip hop artist or anybody starting in the business or an entrepreneur starting a restaurant, I mean, you're going to have mistakes and you're going to have pitfalls, but you can rise above those, so just stick to your guns if you believe, but you got to make sure you believe.
The Business Side of Music is the creation of Tom Sabella and Tracy Snow and is produced by Bob Bender. The Business Side of Music is recorded at Music Dog Studios in Nashville, Tennessee. Production sound designed by Keith Stark. Voiceover and promo by Lisa Busan.
Never had one lesson.
You're out. Finished. Expelled.
This tape will self-destruct in 5 seconds.
You're still here? It's over. Go home. Go.